Hello, Matt here from Leica.com. Today we're talking about telephoto lenses and Leica cameras in particular, but mostly telephoto lenses. Let's jump straight in. After a recent trip to Spain, this video will cover my findings and I'll give you 5 benefits of using a telephoto lens, including 3 specific benefits from using long lenses for portraiture, being a portrait photographer. And then, as I like my geeky lens tests, stay with me and I'll do a Leica versus Nikon mini shootout using those lenses on my Leica SL camera to give you an idea of which lenses may be good for you if you want to try long lenses with Leica cameras. So jumping straight in, if you know anything about Leica M cameras, you'll know that the system is more optimized from 28mm to 135mm. Those are the frame lines found in most Leica M cameras, but as far as I know, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, there are no longer than 135mm lenses which are rangefinder calibrated to use with a Leica M camera. The good news is Leica did make longer lenses for both the Leica R system, which is the older SLR film cameras, and then more recently the Leica SL system, which is for obviously digital cameras, in both prime lenses 180mm plus and longer zoom lenses. So one question you may have is how do you use, say, Leica R lenses on your Leica M camera if you want to use, say, 180mm or a long zoom. You'll need to get a Leica M to R adapter so you can obviously attach your Leica R lens. You'll then need ideally the Leica EVF or Olympus EVF that I use, which is the electronic EVF for Leica M240, Leica M10, Leica M11 cameras. That will then allow you to compose and critically focus by using live view. If you use a Leica SL camera like me, everything's much easier, and the same is true for any other mirrorless camera. You just basically use the EVF on the camera itself, and then you don't need any additional attachments. You just need your adapter to convert Leica R lens to Leica M or to Leica L, depending on whatever mount you're using. If you follow me for a while, either on maybe Instagram, Flickr, or the MrLeica.com blog, you'll know that I tend to favour 50mm for portraits and perhaps 28 to 50mm, maybe a little bit of 90mm, but all lenses within that range. So when I recently went to Spain, I thought mix it up a bit. So I took a 180mm prime lens, f2.8 lens, to see what I could achieve for both maybe landscapes and also portraiture. Let's first look at the benefits of using a longer lens or telephoto lens, and then we'll look at some example photos. So 5 benefits. Benefit number 1, compression. By using a longer lens, it compresses the view in the photo. So say you've got distant mountains or trees and you're taking a portrait, say for me, it's going to bring the background much closer so that it looks like they're right behind them. Equally, if you do, say, landscape photography or cityscapes, by using a long lens, you can compress the streets. Here's some photos when I was shooting in San Francisco with a 180mm lens, shooting film on a Nikon f4, I believe, could have been a Nikon f5. And by using a long lens, I could compress the streets in San Francisco to hopefully make something with a bit more impact. Number 2, bokeh and blur. By using a long lens, it's much easier to create background blur and bokeh and knocking the background out of focus. Number 3, more reach. By having a longer lens, you can physically reach your subject, which you may not be able to reach to fill your frame with, say, a 28mm lens on, I don't know, like a Q2. And number 3, magnification. So it's going to magnify the subject in your frame. So a combination of reach and magnification is why it's very popular for, say, bird photography. You can get a really small bird on the other side of your field in a tree somewhere, and you can fill the frame by using a really long lens. Long lenses will give you a more narrow view of your scene or your subject. And so it's much easier to make a simple composition of a landscape of maybe only one mountain than using, say, a 21mm lens where you see everything and a whole series of mountains, and then the final photo has less impact because everything's small and there's a lot of confusion in the photo. By using a long lens and only focusing in on, say, one mountain peak, it makes it much more simple and then strengthens your composition, hopefully. I think that's 5. I may have miscounted. If you think of any more, let me know in the comments below. Now, if we're talking about portraits in particular, 3 big benefits of using long lenses for portraits. Number 1, again, as we've already said, reach. By using a longer lens, if you want to do, say, an intimate headshot, if you're using a 50mm lens, you've got to be right in the person's face to fill the frame with a 50mm lens. That's not very comfortable for the model because you're kind of encroaching their personal space and having the camera under their nose, so to speak. This is particularly useful with new models who are maybe not used to having cameras in their faces. Number 2, as already mentioned, again, background blur. Portraits look particularly flattering when you've got a nice, soft, dreamy background. By using longer lenses, it's very easy to knock a background out of focus, even if it's only a few meters away. And number 3, I think the biggest one for me, compression and flattening of facial features. If you use a wide lens on someone's face, like some of my early YouTube videos, I think I'm up to 255 videos now. And my early videos, I think I was shooting on perhaps a 24-ish mm lens. And so it feels like my face is right in your face, and it's bringing my nose. Long noses are going to get longer with a wide lens. If you then use a longer lens, I'm shooting currently on a 90mm on the Lumix S5, the 90 Summicron. By using a 90mm, 1, it's giving me a bit of background blur here, as you can see, and 2, it's going to give us slightly more flattened facial features, and hopefully that should be a bit more pleasing and easier to watch. Is the plan. When it comes to models can tell the difference between shooting them on a 35 or 50mm lens and then photographing them on a 135mm or longer lens. I was doing shoots in Tenerife, I think, end of last year, and the girl was saying to me, she knew nothing about photography, and she just said, I want you to use that lens because I look better. And I had a 135 2.8 Elmar R lens with me, and she much preferred all the photos with that lens versus the other lens. So people can tell a difference even if they're not photographers. So I'd say there's a counter argument. If you've got a roundish face and kind of roundish features, by using a long lens, 200 plus, it flattens them, and so they're just like a blob. I don't know how blobbish I look in this video. If you want to give them more of a chiseled look, by using a wider lens, it draws out their features, and so you start to get a bit more dimension to their face. So in the past, when I've tried to use long lenses for portraits, depending on the face, it wasn't really working for me. However, this time for my shoot in Spain, the girl had really sharp chiseled features. And so by using a long lens, it softened it down a bit and made it a bit more girly, a bit more feminine. So once you know what the lenses do, you can use different lenses as different tools for different situations. Not every lens suits every face. So sometimes a telephoto lens will work great, like someone with a long nose. And equally, if they're just a bit of a blob face, no offense meant to anybody, you might be better off with a wider lens. So if I try to make this video a bit broader, 5 reasons you may want to use a long lens. Wildlife photography, motorsport photography, portraits as already mentioned, landscapes, any types of bokeh shots, and then even things like product photography. I really enjoy my long lenses for product photography, for say doing example photos for the MrLeica.com blog of a particular lens or camera. And talking of photos, here's my quick geeky camera test. So the lens I took to Spain is a Nikkor 180mm f2.8D lens, which is an autofocus lens, but if you use it on an adapter to a Leica camera, such as the Leica SL, it becomes a manual focus lens. And here's a few example photos. And being a fixed 180mm lens, I did have to get a long way back for any full-length portraits, as you can see here. The compression really helps, and I love long lenses because you can get both foreground and background blur, giving you more layering in your photo. So the question in my head was, how does this Nikon telephoto lens compared to say a Leica R telephoto lens? I don't have any Leica R telephotos longer than 135mm, and so I used an 80 to 200 Leica Vario-Elmar R lens to compete with the Nikkor in a little shootout in the garden. So here's my simple experiment setup in the garden, and then I shot the lenses at around 1.5 meters. First at f4, f5.6 and f8. I think the Leica R lens is more corrected. If you look at them both f4, you can see that there's more chromatic aberration where there seems to be very little on the Leica R lens photo. Sharpness is quite similar, maybe slightly better contrast on the Leica lens, and the colours were more similar than I would expect. I would expect the Nikkor to be slightly cooler and the Leica R lens to be slightly warmer. But in this example, with these unedited raw photos from a Leica SL camera, and both photos seem very similar in terms of colour. So in terms of price, I think the Leica Zoom is roughly 2 times the price of the Nikkor, and size-wise they're similar-ish size. The Leica is slightly longer, but it gives you much more functionality, being an 80 to 200. And so after my little experiment of using a long lens, how did I find it compared to the 28, 35, 50mm lenses that I use most of the time? Longer lenses will give you a very different looking image, which you might like to give you something different for your portfolio. It gives you more reach, as already mentioned, meaning you can take different photos to what you normally take. It's going to give you more bokeh, as already mentioned. But the drawback is they are big lenses compared to Leica M lenses. So if size is important, that is one big drawback, the size and the weight. But I think it is useful to have one long lens to have in your tool bag for certain situations. Maybe it's landscape photography, maybe it's portraiture, maybe it's wedding photography, very useful for wedding photography to get kind of candid shots without your guests noticing, or long lens shots in the church where you can't get close enough to get to your subjects. There are benefits of having long lenses. When I was in Spain, I accidentally left my Leica SL battery charger in a hotel, and we moved hotels. So I had to use my little backup Lumix GX80 camera for some of the photos until I got my battery charger back. Here is two examples of me using the 108mm 2.8 Nikkor lens on a Mach 4/3 GX80, which gives you the equivalent of double the focal length. So it's going to become 360mm equivalent. The downside to this is if you're then doing full height portraits, you need to be a really, really long way away. So I was kind of in the next field going, stand up a bit, put your arm out a bit, do this a bit. And the biggest problem I found with long lenses when they're that long is the model can't hear what you're saying. So you're like, wait a minute, and then you run over and say, move that bit of hair, and then you run back, compose your shot, oh no, it looks rubbish, run over again, stick your arm out. And so that was one thing I did notice as a negative. When you've got a really long lens and the model can't hear you, I'm not the loudest person. I did notice that as an issue compared to how I normally shoot with 50mm lenses. That's it. If you enjoyed this video, please smash the like button. And as always, a massive thanks to my amazing patrons.